Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us at Space Cowboy Books Online. I'm Jean-Paul, your host, and today we're going to have a reading and interview with the wonderful Claire Nelson. Claire Nelson is a New Zealand-born writer who's spent more than a decade in London working in travel and food journalism and on the editorial desk at Jamie Oliver's magazine. After recovering from her hiking accident, she spent a year living in Vancouver, Canada, where she wrote her first book, Things I Learned from Falling. Claire's back in London working freelance and going for regular walks in city green spaces. And I highly recommend Things I Learned from Falling. I was just telling Claire, you will cry, you will relate to it. It is a very touching book. And so without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Claire. She's going to give us a little brief summary of her story and her experience. And then she's going to share with us a little bit from the book before we move into the interview. If any of our audience has questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. And I'm also going to throw a link in there where you can purchase your own copy of Things I Learned from Falling. So we'll hand it over to Claire.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for tuning in. It is 2 a.m. in London time, so I hope I am coherent. So for people who don't familiar with my story, 2018, I had a hiking accident. I was in Joshua Tree National Park, and I had a serious fall, left me injured and immobile and unable to contact anybody. And I was out there for 4 days and 3 nights. So when I wrote this book, it's that telling that story and also weaving in with it how I ended up in California from London, and my sort of journey through feeling burnout and anxiety and depression and all the niggly little modern day life fears that had kind of just overwhelmed me and set me packing and literally running for the hills. So it's kind of a story about survival, both in the sense of when you're in the outdoors and something bad happens, and also just kind of surviving the day-to-day of what it's like to live in the here and now, pre-pandemic. And I'm going to read a little section from day 2 of my 4-day desert experience. Time is an abstract concept. Where had I heard that line? It must have been back in high school. I still used it, usually when I was trying to be funny or clever. But time had never been as difficult or felt as abstract as it was out here. Keeping track of it wasn't easy. For the moment, at least, I had my iPhone, which could give me nothing in terms of communication with anyone, but it gave me a working clock. I checked in now and then, measuring how accurate my own gauge of time was, and occasionally throwing desperate, hopeful glances at the signal. And then at 8:51 a.m., the screen went black. Fuck. I knew the phone was running low on battery and that this was bound to happen soon enough, but when it actually went flat, I felt surprised somehow. A cold rush of fear in my veins. It didn't matter that I hadn't been able to get any signal on it. Just having it still felt like hope. The phone was my one and only means of communication, working or not, and there was still a part of me that believed a signal might still get through, somehow. Or that if someone was looking for me, they might be able to track my location. There was technology for that, I knew that much. Technology that could ping my phone and figure out where I was. I needed this phone. Having it on, it offered some peace of mind. As time kept on creeping forward, my little lifelines were falling by the wayside. I could do nothing but watch them disappear one by one. I had no idea how fruitful it was to scream for help. I just did it anyway. It was a task best saved for the morning hours, before the sun hit, as the expelling of air from my lungs would make my head spin and leave my mouth and throat sore and dry. Although sometimes I just had to scream anyway, releasing the driving desperation and fear that pounded through my body, alternating between a drawn-out cry of, "Help me!" and "Somebody help me, please!" mixing up the vowel sounds and emphasis both for my personal sanity and in case one or the other was better at carrying distances. I'd scream like this for a good 10 minutes or so at a time, then have a rest and take a sip of water from the camelback. Tiny sips, although I longed to gulp mouthfuls. I was all too aware that I had to make this water last. I just didn't know how long for. As soon as the sun crept over my body again, that fear in my veins went from cold to hot with it, morphing into anger and frustration. What the fuck am I going to do now? How am I going to get out of here? I don't have a phone anymore. What the hell am I going to do about it? It was extraordinarily infuriating that here I was, conscious, coherent, and with full potential to recover from my injuries if I got medical help right now. But I just couldn't move. That single factor was my death now. How agonizing to be lying here, helpless, unable to do anything. I had always been able to take care of myself. It was just the way that I was, the way I'd always done things. And now, when I really, really needed to help myself, I couldn't. Could I? I twisted my head towards the gap in the rocks on my left. I couldn't get up, but what if I could still get out? What if I could somehow roll myself onto my front and use to drag myself out, crawling on my belly like one of those devout religious pilgrims? Could I find my way to freedom? At least get closer to the trail? This was an impossible, ludicrous idea. The pain was unendurable and my bones too broken. My body was as good as glued to the ground. I couldn't so much as raise myself onto my elbows. But I was fired up. I would get myself out of this place. Fuck this situation. I was prepared to try anything. For all of the pain in the world, it had to be better than dying, right? What did I have to lose? Everything, if I didn't try. Since my body couldn't move itself, I would have to find a way to do it manually. This would require some engineering. I came up with a plan to lever myself up, and I jammed the end of the hiking stick under my right hip, wincing as I twisted it in tight, trying to get it as far underneath me as I could, while gaining some traction in the dirt. Essentially, I was setting up a makeshift car jack. Slowly, with all the adrenaline-frenzied delicacy of a movie hero defusing a bomb, I lifted the stick towards my body, raising my right hip from the ground to about 1/4 of an inch. I grimaced, gritting my teeth hard as pain shot through me. Breathe. I lifted it again, another 1/4 inch. More pain. Ah! Breathe. Pain or death, the blue wire or the red wire. Breathe. Another lift, another 1/4 inch. Time rolled by. I don't know how long, but I continued this pace, moving precariously slowly, feeling pain as far as I could take it without triggering that ultimate agony of dislodging my pelvic bones, taking every twitch and nudge carefully, so carefully. After some time, my teeth still clenched hard. I had got my right hip what felt like must have been a good 3 inches off the ground. A guess, of course, as I couldn't see. But it felt like progress, and something akin to optimism was creeping in a little. My head pounded with the concentration, breath held with determination. Come on, Claire, you're doing it. You're really doing it. You're going to roll over. You're going to get yourself out of here. And then it happened. The bomb went off. My pelvis made a crunching, grinding sound as it collapsed on itself. Crunch, 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 click, 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 click. A horrifying scream. I felt my bladder let go. And then a second, frozen in that agonizing position, wanting to drop the stick immediately and fall back to the ground, but knowing I'd have to go through the same burst of pain in order to lower myself again as the shards of bones crunched back into place. I had no choice. Down I went. Another animal scream, the echo falling away in seconds. My head was spinning with pain, dizzy, swimming violently, and I thought I might be sick if only I had anything to throw up. And after all of that, I was on my back again, back to square one. As the aftershocks of pain shivered through my body, I took slow breaths, trying to slow my heart race and gather myself, my racing heart and gather myself. No way, I cannot try that again. I can't. I yanked the stick out from under me and slumped it on the ground next to me, panting, my arms splayed on the dirt, hands shaking. Fuck, I'm not sure this pain is better than death. From where I was lying, the result was going to be the same either way. If I passed out in this heat, I felt there was the very real risk I might not regain consciousness. or that I might not regain consciousness quickly enough to rehydrate. Who knows? All I knew is I was running out of options. I felt like a magician's assistant in a box, violently sawed in half. I stared at my boots, ordering them to sway ever so slightly just to check they were still connected to me. I'd been lying there a short while, breathing heavily as the waves of pain slowly eased, when a movement by the rocks to my right caught my eye. I felt my whole body tense up. I'd been constantly monitoring this rock out of the corner of my eye as the dark, gaping hollow beneath it seemed a terribly inviting hideout for a snake. And now something was there. I slowly turned my head to look, but instead of a predator beneath the rock, there appeared a lizard atop it. It was about 6 inches from head to tail, out to bask in the heat, and he stood squat and sturdy, head high, surveying his kingdom. I smiled. "Hi," I breathed, not wanting to scare him off. We stayed there like that for some time, both of us completely still, not so much as a twitch giving the lizard away as I took in his grey-green body and regal stance. I like lizards. Kids were always looking for them. There was a section of fence that ran along the outside of the dunes near the school recreation centre that was such a prime spot for sunbathing skinks that my brother and friends and I called it the lizard farm. We'd go down there just to catch them, armed with Mum's best plastic containers, which would become temporary housing for the poor skinks we'd snatched from the fence. We'd take them home to observe and prod, to pick up, gently, thumb and forefinger under the forearms, never by the tail. That was something you learned young, that a lizard can drop its tail to escape. Not that they'd get far. Often they'd race under the bureau where one or more of the family cats would sit and wait for them. I gazed at the lizard sunning himself in front of me. "I guess the tables are turned now, eh, mate?" And then, completely unexpectedly, the lizard began doing push-ups. Up, down, up, down, and up, down. I'd never seen a lizard do this, and it was so unexpected and funny, I couldn't help myself. I chuckled. It came out as a rumble in my throat, then a squeak, the noise sending the lizard darting back into the crevice of the rock. "Come back, little guy," I rasped, gazing longingly at the space he had occupied. I was doing a great job of deterring anything that came close, even though I wanted the company. Typical of you. I thought I'd known what loneliness was before. Out here in the desert, this was something else. Not only was I physically isolated from literally everyone, but nobody would even notice I was missing. This was a position I'd put myself in every sense, and it really would be the death of me. I wished I could drop my tail and run.
Thank you, Claire. Thank you for sharing with us. Once again, I put a link to where you can find the book in the chat there, and feel free to drop any questions the audience might have in there. So Claire, I want to ask you, so much of this book is about vulnerability, not just the vulnerability of your situation being stranded in the desert, but the vulnerability that we each go through and the desire for connection with people. And in writing this book and laying yourself so bare, you put yourself in a vulnerable position yet again. So I wanted to ask, what was the experience of writing this book like, and what was it like reliving the experience through the book?
I think I was always going to have to write this book just for myself. I think going through something like that when you're the only one who was there and anyone who experienced it, it's a strange thing to not be able to share that and to be alone with it. And so writing the desert sections were really easy for me. I think just because they were just so clear and so vivid in my mind, and they were just constantly present, that it actually helped me to put those down. Even though, like you say, I was at my most vulnerable in a very physical sense. I think I found the other sections of the book where I talk about my life before and my mental health and the things that I was feeling. That was the part I found really, really hard to write and the most uncomfortable. I mean, it's all the stuff that I spent my entire life hiding from everybody and working very hard to hide all that from everybody. And there was so much shame wrapped up in that, that I was forced to overcome it. But it was through the things that I had learned from this being very vulnerable in the desert. I knew that I was going to have to open that side of myself up as well, and just have to learn to be uncomfortable with it. And I didn't even know if this was something that anyone was going to, how it would be received, if anyone would be interested, or whether they would, you know, just whether that was something that people would understand. And in fact, that's those most vulnerable revelations have been the things that people have written to me about and said, I feel like I've written that myself. And that's been quite the most incredible experience, to realize that we all go around feeling these things, feeling very similar things, and we all kind of hide them all shamefully and think we're alone in it.
I have to say I related to so many of those things too. I'm not surprised to hear that. And I think it's important that you've opened up that sort of dialogue so that people can realize they're not alone in that. So in reading the book, one gets the sense that you almost go through this spiritual transformation because of this experience. And I want to know if any of these lessons and those spiritual changes in you been difficult to retain once you've moved back to, whatever normal life is, living in London again and being so far away from the desert.
Yes, yes is the answer to that. It's interesting. I've been very adamant all along to make it clear that these are things that I have come to learn about myself and about the way I was living my life, but I haven't just been able to just come out completely changed and completely different. It's almost like you get the clarity, you get the mirror that's held up, so you can see what it is that needs to be changed, and you can see what it is that needs to be accepted. But then you have to learn how to sort of to bring that into your life every single day. It has to be like an active move to do that. So it's not like you can be suddenly spiritually changed, but you can be very aware of the changes that need to be made and then consciously go about changing them all the time. So it's yeah, I mean, it's I talk about learning to, knowing I need to be vulnerable and opening up to people, and I've become much better at doing that, but I still have to make myself do it sometimes. And when I feel the same discomforts coming in, or when I learn about how much fear was kind of ruling all these different aspects of my life, and those fears are still there, but it's just kind of catching it and going, oh, okay, I'm letting this overwhelm me again. And then of course, I write a lot about how I was living so much of my life on the internet through social media, and that's been really challenging. I kind of gave myself a free pass, through all the time when I was recovering, and then I spent a year living in Canada where I didn't know anyone in Vancouver and writing the book, and I was like, well, that's okay too. I can use this tool for communication and connecting with people. But when I get back to London and I start living my so-called normal life, I'm going to do things better, and I'm going to find a healthier balance. And then 3 weeks after I moved back here, it was like the pandemic began. And then, I mean, who wasn't kind of, glued to their social media for the best part of 2020? That was a really big challenge. I found all my old habits coming back and feeling really uncomfortable about that. But it just sort of had to, acknowledge that this was, as the saying goes, unprecedented circumstances. And it's really just been this year that I've managed to kind of get a handle on that, and I'm not living my life full time on social media, and I'm stepping way back from it. I feel less compelled to do it, and that's starting to feel really good now. But it like I say, it has to be like a conscious and active thing all the time.
I suppose any revelation is like that, though. We need to turn them into habits.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if this sort of thing, you're still an avid hiker. So if this sort of thing happened to you again, or if for somehow you could foresee that someone would be in this situation, what would you do differently, and what would be some of your major recommendations?
Yeah. I mean, that's a good question, because I really want to be a cautionary tale. And I mean, I can't stress this enough, but I mean, I love solo hiking, and I know there's people who different camps of whether they're for or against solo hiking, to each their own. I love solo hiking, and I just think to let somebody know where you're going, even if you think it's just like a minor day hike, just let someone know where you're going and when you are planning to come back. And I say this as someone who I still feel a little bit silly sometimes doing that, if I'm just like, it's not that big of a hike. But of course, I now know that I'm not invincible, and it will only take a second, and then if something goes wrong, it'll have been the most important decision I've ever made. I think it's easy to assume that that it won't happen to me, or, that there aren't that many risks we just don't know. You just don't know what's going to happen. So let somebody know where you're going and when you plan to come back. Have a fallback plan. Keep yourself safe. And take lots of water. Always take more water than you think.
And God willing, that'll be the last time you're in a situation like that.
Yeah, I hope that that's something that I only had to learn once. And then
We've got a question from the audience here. This one is from Gabriel. Was the pain that you were experiencing something that you eventually acclimated to, like we would for other sensations? Or was it this constant force that was threatening to cause you to lose hope?
it's a really good question. It's in a way, I wouldn't say I acclimatized to it so much as I had so much adrenaline going through me, that, and as long as I didn't move, I could kind of deal with it. It's funny that, like, the way that my mind was working when I was in the survival mode, it's kind of like the pain was there, but I had to focus on other things, or otherwise I was, not going to get. And by focusing on other things, that includes finding things that would, conjure up hope that I could hold on to. That was incredibly important. Anything that was going to make, hope stick around that I could hold on to, I'd grab onto that. But the pain was always very present, and it was kind of like this battle of hope versus pain the whole time. It's like the physical pain, the mental hope, and it really does become like this mind over body. Where the mind goes, the body follows, and gosh, it's incredible the power of the mind and what we can do with that. And then, of course, like now, it's really hard for me to remember that pain, and it's like a doctor said to me. He said, you'll forget the pain because we're designed to do that. Because, like, I always say this, but like, people wouldn't give birth more than once if they remembered how painful it was. So, we are designed to not be able to recall it.
Another audience question here. This is from Greg and Candace. Did your experience as a food and travel writer contribute to your connection to audience in writing this book?
Wow, gosh, these are great questions. I don't know, actually. I've always written. This is the thing. I've always written, and I was always really into travel writing. Was always where my heart was, and sort of, for me, food and travel are so inextricably linked that when I came into sort of the food industry, it sort of just veered off in that particular direction. So I don't know, like, I think it's just always been, that's how I feel I can communicate best. I mean, even speaking, I'm constantly feel like my words are coming out all wrong. But when I write, that's when I feel at my safest. That's when I feel like I can get myself across. So I've always been trying to do things that involve writing for that reason. So that way, if I can express myself better and communicate better, it has to be in writing. I hope that answered that question.
I think that might be a common thing for writers.
Right.
And so you're still an avid and frequent hiker. I've seen pictures on social media of you in some amazing looking places. How has this pleasure changed for you? And when out hiking, do you ever re-experience some of the fear that you went through here in the national park?
I mean, not in terms of fear. I don't feel. I still love hiking. I love it more than I even used to, because I think I feel an incredible sense of gratitude. That gratitude follows me around in everything that I do, but I think when I'm hiking in particular, it comes most naturally because I'm in that happy place. I'm very aware of the fact that I'm physically able to do this, that circumstantially I'm able to be on that trail at that time. And so I'm kind of so overwhelmed with that. The fear isn't so much there. I would say it's more of an awareness of risk that used to not be there. I can be a lot more gung-ho back before all of this happened. Not to say that I was, throwing myself, off ledges and things like that, but it was just, it's just that thing of, it's not going to happen to me. And if you do something enough, you just stop feeling like there's any risk there. And now it's like, I carry that around, like, I know that something can go wrong, and it can be so easy for it to go wrong. And I'm not going to pretend like I'm somehow special or invincible. And so there might be a time I'm like, oh, I kind of want to go off on this trail, or this, the weather looks a bit dicey, and it'd be like, whereas before I may have pushed those boundaries a little bit more. Now I'm just like, let's not be too foolish here and pulling back. There was a moment, I think, when I recently went on a hike. Some friends and I went and walked up to the highest peak in England, which is Scarfell Pike. And one of my friends she's not used to hiking so much, certainly not that kind of hiking. She drank all of her water really early on into the hike. And I had this like really strong reaction to that, in terms of just this feeling the panic of suddenly realizing that between us, we didn't have enough water for us all. And I was really surprised that it was like a physical response, really, and realizing that, wow, okay, I guess there is still something there from going through that. Like, I really don't like the idea of not having enough water.
And do you still the hiking stick in the book almost becomes this totem, you know? Are you still bringing that with you on hiking trips?
I
Is that a
don't take it.
constant companion?
I don't take it on hiking trips anymore because it's so special. This is it here. But yeah, I keep this with me. It's very precious. I take a stick, just not as special as this one.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And in the book, I don't want to give too many spoilers away here, but the book kind of culminates in you returning to Lost Palms Oasis, or that was the trail where your accident took place near, in a very poignant scene in the book that got me quite teary. But I wonder if you can elaborate and tell us a little bit about the emotions that you experienced upon returning to this place with friends and having overcome such a harrowing experience.
I mean, that was an incredible day. There was so many feelings going on. They were all kind of like bubbling around in my head at that point. Um, it was wonderful, but it was surreal, because it was like I can only describe it as being like I was living two alternate lives in one go, because I was on this trail where things were familiar, but I was with my friends, some of who I think are here. So hi guys. And then at the same time, I thought, but gosh, somewhere over there, I'm just lying out over there, and just trying to put those two things together. And it was really odd. It was just like, I'm here, I'm walking, I'm hiking, and I'm with my friends, but I'm also out there, and I'm really injured, and I'm alone, and I'm dying. And it was just, I couldn't quite come to terms with the fact that either one of those could have been the way things ended up. And thankfully, it was that one that I was currently the better one. So it was. I found that really a really great process to kind of come to terms with the reality of what had happened. And I've been asked before, when did I decide that I wanted to go back and walk that trail? And the truth is, it was the moment that I knew I was going to live. And I don't really know if I can explain why. I mean, closure always seems like a really easy answer, but it was just like a compulsion. Like, okay, well, I need to come back, and it drove me through my recovery. It was, if you recover, if you can do this properly, and you can be patient, because I'm a very terrible invalid person. I like to just push things forward. Like, if you can just heal properly, you can go back and do that trail. And so it was wonderful to be there and to do that, and to have people around me that I cared about.
And when I saw you last, which I think might have been the trip, I think it was the trip where you went and did that hike again. Am I correct?
It was the next hike.
Okay.
Yeah.
One would never be able to tell that you had been in an accident. So at least from the outside, it seems like your recovery was fairly complete. But do you want to tell us a little bit about the recovery process, what that was like for you, and have you faced any challenges as a hiker getting around after such a drastic injury?
Yeah, I mean, I'm super lucky that I was back on my feet within a year. It was a lot of dealing with pain. I had a lot of nerve pain, and which would, because I shattered my pelvis. I also seriously sprained my ankle, and the ankle is actually the thing that's still giving me grief now. In fact, Friday I have I'm getting a steroid injection because there's a cyst on the bone, and none of it's really healed very well. And so I do have a lot of issues with that leg kind of flaring up, and I think I probably always will. But for certainly that first year, it was just really learning to, put weight on my leg again and on my hip again. sort of graduating from being in a wheelchair to crutches and then walking again and then getting out on the hike. It was learning to slow down. It was learning to heal, and learning to deal with pain, and learning to, you know, let people look after me because I'm so used to looking after myself. So there was all these different elements of that recovery period, which, you know, when I look back now, it's like I can't believe it, you know, I can't believe it was only, I guess, 9 months really that I was sort of you know, out of commission, so to speak. And I just feel really lucky that, you know, if I'd fallen slightly differently or I'd fallen, you know, a couple of feet one way or the other, then, you know, the consequences could have been so much worse.
And as a lover of the desert, I have to ask you, this was only a brief mention in the book, but you've also traveled to the Sahara Desert. And I wanted to ask you, what were your impressions of the differences between a place like the Sahara and the Mojave? And if you don't mind just sharing a little bit about what your experience in the Sahara was, because you touch upon it in the book, and it sounds like an amazing story, but probably a book all its own.
I mean, that was 2010. I really wanted to go into the Sahara Desert. Went with my boyfriend at the time, and we had 2 guides with us. One was a camel hand and one was the guide. These 2 young guys, and we went out for 3 nights. And I just remember that was the trip when, for the very first time, I really understood how content I felt when I'm made to feel really small in nature, like when I feel really insignificant. And I remember it because there was one night, my boyfriend was off playing with his camera. I was sitting on this sort of ledge of this plateau, and the sun was setting, and I was making little notes in my notebook. And I just remember thinking I could see somewhere off, because I mean, the Sahara is just like, there's a lot of nothing. It's just sand and nothing for just miles and miles and miles. And I could see this little glint of a 4x4 off in the distance, and immediately I felt like, what an intrusion! Like, and I just had this real sense of, I just want to be so far away from you know, from civilization, and just be feeling like this tiny insignificant thing. And it was wonderful. And then we woke up the next morning, and our camels had run away. They hadn't been tethered properly. And it was a full day of suddenly like panic of, well, we can't keep carrying on to these giant dunes we were trying to get to, and we were clambering up onto these sort of the highest points that we could find to see them. And of course, like, there's just waves of these dunes that just keep changing, and they shift all the time. And I actually recently was watching a documentary on Mauro Prosperi, who was an Italian who ran the Marathon des Sables in the 90s, and which is an ultra marathon through the Sahara Desert. And he got lost because there was a windstorm. It just changed his surroundings, and he got lost out there for 10 days. And it's just it's an incredible story, which, you know, I kind of related to some elements of it, but just, you know, being the desert's just incredible. And that's when I fell in love with deserts. But then, you know, the Mojave, or the Californian deserts, by contrast, there's that same sense of kind of vastness, but there's not really the same nothingness there. Like, I love the fact that there's all these kind of different life forms everywhere, and it's sort of otherworldly, but it's so full of life, even though it's sort of less below the surface than in the Sahara. And, you know, and it just changes, you know, from high to low and all of that. I find it so fascinating.
And I have to ask, speaking of desert life, your greatest fear of the Mojave and the Sonoran Desert here was that you might encounter a rattlesnake. And you know, obviously you weren't concerned at the time with falling or being stranded, but snakes were a big concern. Did you ever get to see a rattlesnake?
I've still never seen a rattlesnake, and I know that's supposed to be a good thing. That you haven't seen a rattlesnake. But the thing is, like, also I'm from New Zealand and we don't have snakes, so I mean, you know, the whole concept of it's so wild and exciting to me, and I wanted to see one, but just from a safe distance. And so no, I've still not seen my rattlesnake.
I have not either. We have the beautiful
Really?
Mojave green here, but as long as I've been here, I've never encountered one. I see rosy boas, gopher snakes, red racers, all manner of snake, but haven't met the rattlesnake personally yet either, which I can't say that I mind. From afar, perhaps. So, what I would also like to know, because this was such a tremendous book, do you have any plans to write another book? If so, do you have any subject material in mind? And just in general, what is coming up next for you?
Well, it's funny you asked that. I am about to start working on another book idea, which is, I mean, it's going to involve New Zealand. I have a very, I don't know, I have a very complicated relationship with New Zealand. And I think anyone who has moved away from the country that they're from and built a life somewhere else probably relates to that in some way. And I really, it's something I've always wanted to do and explore more. And I think in the last year and a half, particularly with the pandemic and being cut off from New Zealand and everyone around me having conversations of like, well, our life looks different now. Where do I want to be? Where do I want to live? Um, and so and everyone kept saying to me, oh, I'm sure you're just going to be back to New Zealand. And I'm like, but I've been in the UK for 16 years. This is my home now. And so this idea of like, what is home and what connects you to where you're from and all of this, I'm going to explore that. And it's, yeah, I'm actually going to New Zealand on this Saturday coming, and I will be doing some hiking. That's all I'm going to say about it at the moment.
Well, Claire, thank you so much for sharing a bit of your story and reading with us. Things I Learned from Falling. Our audience, this is a wonderful book. Check out the chat room where you can find a link to getting that. And thank you for joining us all the way from England in the middle of the night to talk to us here in California.
I just wish I could be there in person. Like, I miss the desert so much. I've been so looking forward to being able to chat with you and to, kind of virtually be in Joshua Tree again. And yeah, and John Paul's in the book, so.
When you do make it back, we will definitely host an in-person event, whether to read from this book or whatever you've got going on then. Thank you so much, Claire. Thank you to our audience for joining us, and we hope to see you all next time.
Thanks, everyone.